I remember the day everything changed. It was a typical Thursday evening, the kind where the sun sets in a blaze of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the city. I had just returned home from a long day at work, feeling the fatigue seep into my bones. My wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen where she often found solace in cooking. The aroma of garlic and herbs filled the air, a comfort that usually welcomed me home. But that evening, something felt off. As I stepped into the living room, I noticed her phone buzzing on the coffee table. It was a pulsating light that seemed to beckon me closer. I hesitated, recalling the countless times I had trusted her with my heart. But curiosity gnawed at me. I picked it up intending to silence it, but the screen lit up with a name that made my heart drop: Jessica. Jessica was my boss's wife, a woman who, by all accounts, should have been off limits. I felt a chill run down my spine as I opened the message. It was a flirtatious exchange, one that left no room for doubt. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, the phone slipping from my grip and landing with a soft thud on the carpet. The reality of what I had just uncovered crashed over me like a tidal wave. In that moment, the world around me faded. The kitchen, once filled with warmth, now felt cold and foreign. I could hear the clattering of pots and pans, but it was as if I were submerged underwater, the sounds muffled and distant. My heart raced, pounding against my chest as I grappled with the betrayal. How could she do this? How could they both do this? I had always seen my life as a straightforward path. I worked hard at my job, I loved my wife, and we built a life together, or so I thought. But now I felt like a fool, a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, twisting the knife with every thought of their laughter shared behind my back. As I stood there, frozen in disbelief, I felt a surge of anger rising within me. It was a slow burn at first, but it quickly ignited into a raging fire. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted to confront them. I wanted them to know the pain they had inflicted upon me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to confront Sarah. I had to hear her side to see if she would even try to deny it. The thought of her deceit made my stomach churn, but I couldn't let this moment pass without clarity. I strode into the kitchen, my heart pounding with every step. "Sarah," I called, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. She turned, a smile fading from her lips as she noticed the look on my face. "We need to talk." The kitchen lights flickered above us, casting shadows that danced ominously on the walls. I could see the confusion in her eyes, but I didn't care. I had to know the truth. I had to know if the woman I loved was capable of such treachery. As I stood there, the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders, I braced myself for the confrontation that would change everything. The air in the kitchen felt thick, almost suffocating. I could see Sarah's brow furrow as she sensed the gravity of the moment. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, the clattering of utensils falling silent, replaced by the tension that hung between us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to unleash. "Sarah," I said again, my voice steadier this time, "I found some messages on your phone, messages between you and Jessica." Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "What? What are you talking about?" I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the instinctual denial rising up, but I wasn't about to let her sidestep this. "Don't play games with me." I saw the messages, the flirting, the plans to meet up. Each word felt like a hammer striking an anvil, ringing loud and clear in the silence of the room. She opened her mouth, then closed it, seemingly searching for the right words. "It's not what you think," she finally exclaimed, her voice rising with desperation. "We were just what?" I interrupted, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Just having fun, just being friends, because it seems like you crossed a line. That shouldn't have ever been approached." Her expression shifted from confusion to a mix of guilt and anger. "You don't understand. Then make me understand," I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. "How could you betray me like this, with my boss's wife no less?" The realization of my words struck her, and I could see the shame wash over her face. "It was a mistake," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen. A mistake." I scoffed, the bitterness in my voice palpable. "You didn't just trip and fall into a relationship. You actively chose to betray me, to betray us. Did you even think about what this would do to me?" The tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the whirlwind of emotions raging within me. I was furious, heartbroken, and utterly devastated. I had given her everything, my love, my trust, my life, and she had thrown it away. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't think it would go this far. I thought I could keep it. Separate, separate," I echoed, incredulous. "You thought you could keep a secret affair with my boss's wife separate from our marriage. You were willing to risk everything for a thrill." Before she could respond, the front door swung open and in walked my boss, Mark. He was jovial, clearly in a good mood, oblivious to the storm brewing in our kitchen. "Hey, you two, I brought dinner," he called out, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. I felt a surge of rage at the sight of him. How could he be so carefree when I was standing on the precipice of heartbreak? I glanced at Sarah and the color drained from her face. She hadn't expected him home so soon. "Mark," I said, my voice dripping with disdain, "we need to talk." His smile faltered as he took in the scene, Sarah's tear-streaked face and my clenched fists. "What's going on? Why don't you tell him?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. "Tell him about your little affair." Mark's expression shifted to confusion, then shock as he pieced together the situation. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of concern. "Your wife and my wife," I said, my words sharp and cutting. "They've been involved." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face paled as he glanced at Sarah, who looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Is this true?" "Mark, she began, but he held up a hand, cutting her off. "I need you to be honest with me," he said, his voice low and steady. "Did you really betray me like this?" Her silence spoke volumes. I could see the realization dawn on Mark, the betrayal sinking in like a heavy stone. The atmosphere shifted and the tension thickened as we stood there, three people caught in a web of lies and deceit. "Sarah, how could you?" Mark's voice cracked, the hurt evident. "I trusted you." "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I never meant for it to happen." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said, my heart racing. "You've ruined everything." Mark took a step back, his expression a mix of disbelief and anger. "We need to talk about this, all of us." As I looked at both of them, I realized that this was only the beginning. The betrayal I felt was just the tip of the iceberg. I felt a dark resolve forming within me. I would not let this go unpunished. I would make them both pay for the pain they had caused. After the confrontation, the house felt like a battlefield littered with the debris of shattered trust. I left Sarah and Mark standing in the kitchen, their faces pale and filled with disbelief. I couldn't bear to look at them any longer. I needed space to think, to breathe. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars twinkling above me like distant reminders of a life I once cherished. As I paced the yard, my mind raced. The anger was still simmering beneath the surface, but it was morphing into something more calculated. I had been wronged, and I refused to let them walk away unscathed. Revenge was not just an impulse, it was a necessity. They had taken everything from me, and I was determined to ensure they felt the weight of their betrayal. But how? I needed a plan. I sat down on the porch steps, the wood creaking beneath me, and began to think. My thoughts spiraled, weaving together a tapestry of revenge that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I had to be careful. This was not just about retaliation, but about crafting a response that would leave a lasting impact. I recalled the dynamics of my relationship with Mark. He was my boss, but more than that, he was a man who prided himself on his reputation. He was respected in our industry, known for his integrity and leadership. But what if I could tarnish that image? What if I could expose the truth behind his perfect facade? The idea blossomed in my mind. I could gather evidence of their affair and use it to my advantage. I imagined sending an anonymous tip to the company's HR department or leaking the information to the local newspaper. The scandal would not only ruin their personal lives but could also jeopardize Mark's career. The thought sent a thrill down my spine, but I had to be meticulous. I needed proof, something concrete that would leave no room for denial. I considered the possibility of surveillance. I could track Sarah's movements, find out when she met with Jessica, and capture them in the act. The very idea of watching them, knowing I was one step ahead, filled me with a sense of power I hadn't felt in days. I grabbed my phone and opened a note-taking app, jotting down my thoughts. Surveillance, evidence, expose. Each word felt like a step closer to reclaiming my life, my dignity. However, a voice in the back of my mind cautioned me. Was I becoming the very thing I despised? I had once been a man of principle, a man who believed in honesty and integrity. But now I was plotting revenge like a character from a dark novel. I shook my head, pushing the doubt aside. They had crossed a line and I had every right to respond. The more I thought about it, the more justified my actions felt. They had betrayed my trust, and it was time for them to face the consequences. I wouldn't just be taking revenge, I would also be reclaiming my power. I spent the next few days in a haze of determination. I started by gathering information about Sarah's schedule. I watched her closely, noting any changes in her routine. She was still trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but I could see the cracks forming. The guilt weighed heavily on her, and it was only a matter of time before she slipped up. Then I turned my attention to Jessica. I needed to know more about her life, her vulnerabilities. I reached out to a few mutual friends, casually asking about her and her relationship with Mark. I wanted to understand the dynamics at play, to find the weaknesses I could exploit. On a particularly restless night, I decided to drive to Mark's house. I parked a few streets away and waited. The darkness wrapped around me like a cloak as I watched the front door, my heart pounding in anticipation. After what felt like an eternity, I saw them. Sarah arrived first, her body language betraying her anxiety. She glanced around nervously before slipping inside. A few minutes later, Jessica pulled up in her car. I could hardly believe my eyes as I watched them embrace. A sick feeling settled in my stomach, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the camera I had brought with me. I snapped several photos, each click of the shutter a reminder of the betrayal that had brought me to this point. As I drove home that night, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and dread. I had crossed a line, but I also felt empowered. I was no longer the victim, I was the architect of my own revenge. The thought of exposing them, of watching their carefully constructed lives crumble, fueled my resolve. But beneath the surface, a nagging doubt lingered. Was this truly what I wanted? As I lay in bed that night, the photos scattered across my mind, I realized that revenge was a double-edged sword. It could bring satisfaction, yes, but it could also consume me. I needed to tread carefully. I had to ensure that my actions didn't come back to haunt me. With that thought lingering in my mind, I drifted off to sleep, the images of betrayal and revenge swirling in my dreams. I was ready to move forward, but I would need to be strategic. I would make them pay, but I wouldn't lose myself in the process. The plan was set in motion, and the air around me crackled with a sense of anticipation. I had collected evidence, and each photo I had taken felt like a small victory. With every click of the camera, I was reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost to betrayal. Yet, as I prepared to execute my plan, a sense of unease began to creep in. I was stepping into a dark territory, one that would lead to consequences I couldn't fully grasp. I decided to take the next step carefully. My first target was Jessica. If I could expose her affair, it would not only hurt her but also reflect back on Mark, creating a ripple effect that would shake the foundations of their lives. I spent the next few days gathering more information, digging into Jessica's social media profiles and her interactions with others. I wanted to find out what made her tick, what her weaknesses were, and how I could leverage them to my advantage. Then I had an idea that made my heart race. Jessica was known in our community for her charity work. She often organized events and fundraisers, portraying herself as a pillar of virtue. What if I could use her public image against her? I could anonymously send the photos of her and Sarah to the board of directors of her charity organization. The scandal would not only tarnish her reputation, but also expose the affair to everyone who had ever admired her. With my heart pounding, I crafted a carefully worded email. I made it sound like a concerned citizen who had stumbled upon the information and felt it was their duty to inform the organization about the moral character of someone in a leadership position. I attached the photos, ensuring that the evidence was clear and damning. As I hit send, A rush of adrenaline coursed through my veins. This was it. I was taking control and there was no turning back. But I wasn't done yet. Next, it was time to target Mark. I thought long and hard about how to approach this. I wanted to ensure that his world would come crashing down just like mine had. The idea struck me one afternoon as I sipped coffee at my favorite cafe, watching the world go by. What if I could plant seeds of doubt in the minds of those around him? If I could create whispers of suspicion about his integrity? It would undermine his authority and respect in the workplace. I reached out to a few colleagues of mine, friends who were close to Mark but also trusted me. I casually mentioned my suspicions about his marriage, framing it as a concern for his well-being. "Have you noticed anything off about Mark lately?" I would ask, feigning innocence. "I've heard some rumors floating around." It didn't take long for the whispers to spread. I could see the impact of my words taking root, and it felt exhilarating. I watched as colleagues exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. The seeds of doubt were planted, and I knew they would grow. As the days passed, the fallout began to unfold. The charity organization received my email and promptly took action. Jessica was called in for a meeting, and the board confronted her about the affair. I could only imagine the humiliation she felt as her carefully constructed image began to unravel. News of the scandal spread like wildfire, and soon enough, people began talking about it in hushed tones. I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me as I envisioned her standing there, realizing that her betrayal had cost her everything. But it didn't stop there. Mark was starting to feel the pressure at work as well. The rumors I had planted began to circulate, creating an atmosphere of distrust. His colleagues began to question his judgment, and I watched from the sidelines as the man who had once seemed invincible began to falter. I felt powerful, like a puppeteer pulling the strings of their lives, orchestrating their downfall. Yet, there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Was this truly justice, or was I simply becoming the monster I had set out to destroy? I had wanted to reclaim my power, but now I found myself questioning the morality of my actions. Each victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the realization that I was inflicting pain on others, just as they had done to me. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, the weight of my choices began to settle heavily on my chest. I flipped through the photos I had taken, the evidence of their betrayal, and for the first time I felt a twinge of regret. Was this what I wanted? To watch their lives crumble at my hands? But then I remembered the pain they had caused me. I had every right to retaliate. I pushed the doubt aside, convincing myself that I was merely restoring balance. They had betrayed me, and now I was making them pay. I had to stay the course. As the fallout from my actions continued to unfold, I realized that I was at a crossroads. I could either continue down this path of revenge, letting it consume me, or I could find a way to reclaim my life without losing myself in the process. But for now, I chose to remain in the shadows, watching as the consequences of my plan took shape. The days turned into weeks, and the fallout from my revenge began to take on a life of its own. Jessica's life had unraveled publicly, her reputation shattered as news of the affair spread throughout the community. The charity organization she had once led with pride severed ties, and I could see the toll it was taking on her. I watched from a distance, a mixture of satisfaction and guilt tugging at my heartstrings. She had become a shell of her former self, avoiding social gatherings and shying away from any public appearance. I caught glimpses of her at the grocery store, her eyes downcast, her shoulders slumped. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it was quickly overshadowed by the reminder of her betrayal. She had chosen to hurt me, and now she was paying the price. Mark, too, was feeling the heat. His once sterling reputation at work was tarnished as whispers of his wife's infidelity spread like wildfire. The board of directors had called for an emergency meeting, and I could only imagine the tension in the room as they discussed the implications of Jessica's actions. Mark's leadership was called into question, and the atmosphere in the office became thick with suspicion. I watched as he became increasingly withdrawn, his confidence shaken. But as I observed their downfall, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that began to settle in. What had I truly accomplished? I had orchestrated their pain, yet it didn't bring me the satisfaction I had anticipated. I had gained power, yes, but it felt hollow. I had become the architect of their destruction, and with each passing day, I found myself questioning my own morality. One evening, as I sat in my living room, the photos of their betrayal spread across the table before me, I felt a strange sense of disconnection. I had started this journey with a clear goal of revenge, but now I was left with a sense of loss. I couldn't deny that I enjoyed watching them squirm, but the thrill was fading, replaced by a gnawing realization that I was losing a part of myself in the process. I thought about Sarah. She hadn't been the same since the confrontation. She was still living in our home, but it felt like we were strangers sharing a space. I could see the guilt etched across her face, but she never brought up the affair. We moved through the motions of our daily lives, but the emotional distance between us grew wider. The love we once shared felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the betrayal. One night, as I sat on the couch, I finally decided to confront her. "Sarah," I said quietly, "we need to talk." She looked up, surprise flashing across her face. "About what?" "About us. About everything that's happened." Her eyes filled with tears, and I felt a pang of empathy. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you. I was lost, and I made a terrible mistake. Do you even understand the pain you caused?" I shot back, my anger bubbling up again. "You betrayed me with my boss's wife. How could you think I would just forgive you?" "I don't expect you to forgive me," she replied, her voice breaking. "But I want to try and make this right. I want to rebuild what we had." I shook my head, my heart heavy. "I don't even know if I can trust you anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. We both knew that our relationship had been irrevocably changed. I had sought revenge against her and Mark, but in doing so, I had also lost the love we once shared. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure of which direction to take. As the days turned into weeks, I watched as the consequences of my actions unfolded. Mark was called into meetings, and I could see the toll it was taking on him. He was a proud man, and the whispers of discontent in the office were eroding his confidence. The very foundation of his career was crumbling, and I felt a sense of satisfaction, but it was accompanied by a growing sense of unease. I had become the villain in this story, and I was starting to feel the weight of that role. Each victory felt like a step further away from the man I used to be. I had taken pleasure in their pain, but now it felt like a poison seeping into my own soul. I was trapped in a cycle of revenge that was consuming me, and I had to find a way out. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, I made a decision. I would confront my actions and the consequences they had wrought. I would not let revenge define me. I needed to reclaim my life, to find a way to heal from the pain that had brought me to this point. The next day, I reached out to a therapist. I needed to talk to someone who could help me navigate the tumultuous emotions I was feeling. I realized that I had to let go of the anger and resentment that had fueled my revenge. I had to find a way to move forward, not just for myself but for Sarah as well. As I began this journey of self-discovery and healing, I felt a flicker of hope. I could reclaim my life without being consumed by the darkness of revenge. I had taken my pound of flesh, but now it was time to focus on rebuilding myself, my marriage, and my future. The therapy sessions became a sanctuary for me, a place where I could unpack the chaos swirling inside my mind. I learned to articulate my feelings, to confront the anger and hurt that had driven me to seek revenge. Each session peeled back layers of pain, revealing the underlying issues I had buried beneath the surface. I discovered how deeply the betrayal had wounded me, but more importantly, I began to understand the impact of my own actions. As I sat across from my therapist, I realized that revenge had not only been a reaction to my pain, but also a misguided attempt to reclaim control over my life. I had wanted to restore balance, but instead, I had created a cycle of negativity that threatened to engulf me. I was becoming the very thing I had despised, bitter, vengeful, and consumed by anger. Revenge can feel like a powerful tool, my therapist said one day, her voice calm and steady. But it often leads to more pain. What do you want to gain from it? I pondered her question, my mind racing. I had wanted justice, to see them suffer as I had. But now I realized that true healing wouldn't come from their downfall. It would come from letting go of the anger that had shackled me. I had to reclaim my life on my own terms, not through the suffering of others. With each passing week, I began to shift my focus. I started to communicate more openly with Sarah. We had a long way to go, but I wanted to rebuild our relationship, to find a way to reconnect despite the betrayal. I could see the remorse in her eyes, the genuine desire to make amends. It wasn't easy, but we began to have honest conversations about our feelings and the cracks in our marriage. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I took her hand. "I'm still hurt by what you did, but I want to work through this. I want us to find a way back to each other." Her eyes filled with tears and she nodded. "I want that too. I know I can't change the past, but I want to prove to you that I'm committed to our future." As we began to rebuild, I found solace in the small moments, cooking together, going for walks, and talking late into the night. We were slowly rediscovering the connection we had lost. It was a long road, but I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps we could emerge from this stronger than before. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the fallout from my revenge. Mark's career took a hit, and he had to navigate the murky waters of workplace politics. I felt a pang of guilt each time I saw him at the office, but I reminded myself that he had made his choices too. He had betrayed my trust, and his downfall was a consequence of his actions. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. One day, I decided to reach out. To him, I crafted a message, unsure of how he would respond. I simply said, "We need to talk." To my surprise, he agreed to meet for coffee. As we sat across from each other, the tension was palpable. I could see the weariness etched on his face, the burden of guilt weighing him down. "I never thought it would come to this," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I messed up everything." "Yeah, you did," I replied, my voice steady. "But so did I took things too far. I thought I was restoring justice, but all I did was create more pain." He nodded, his expression one of understanding. "I've lost a lot because of my choices, and I'm sure you felt the same way." In that moment, I realized that we were both victims of our own decisions. We had both lost something precious: trust, love, and respect. The conversation shifted from blame to understanding, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. I was seeking closure. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had taken a step towards healing, not just for myself but for both of us. We had both made mistakes, but now it was time to move forward, to reclaim our lives without being defined by our past. In the weeks that followed, I continued to focus on my personal growth. I immersed myself in new hobbies, spent time with friends, and even took a trip by myself to clear my mind. I had learned that life was too short to be consumed by anger and resentment. I wanted to embrace the present, to find joy in the little things. As for Sarah, we continued to work on our relationship. We went to couples therapy, where we learned to communicate better and rebuild trust. It wasn't easy, but we were both committed to the journey. I could feel the love growing between us again, a fragile yet beautiful bond that was slowly mending. And as I looked back on the chaos of the past months, I realized that I had emerged a different person. I had faced my demons, learned from my mistakes, and found a way to heal. Revenge had not brought me the satisfaction I had sought. Instead, it had shown me the importance of forgiveness, both for others and for myself. Life was still a work in progress, but I was ready to embrace the future. I had reclaimed my power not through vengeance but through self-discovery and growth. I had learned that true strength lies not in the desire for revenge, but in the ability to rise above pain and find peace. With hope in my heart and a newfound sense of purpose, I stepped forward into the light, ready to embrace whatever came next.